welcome. This VIED session is going to talk about our bellavista platform that we have. Essentially, this is our conventional ventilator platform. I've connected the display up to the screen here so you have good visibility. We have several models under the platform. We have the bellavista Neo, which is a device dedicated for neonates. We have the bellavista 1000 and we have the 1000E. Essentially, they all run on the same platform, but the 1000E comes fully spec'd with the most comprehensive suite of software. There's only a couple of extra features that you can potentially take as an add-on. The bellavista 1000 has a slightly smaller screen and has a much more pared down and tailored approach to the software inclusions on that. The bellavista 1000 has a minimum of 4-hour operating time on its battery, and the bellavista 1000E has a minimum of 3 hours. So essentially what we've done with the bellavista platform, we've taken all the best bits from conventional ventilators and all the best bits from non-invasive ventilators and put them into one box so that we can go at least toe-to-toe or exceed in the marketplace, which is getting increasingly congested and competitive. So inside we have a turbine, and that runs up to 260 litres of flow per minute. And on the side, you'll notice, if I just pop this up here, we have only an inlet for oxygen. We don't need compressed air, which saves cost and resources for the hospital. We entrain air in from the ambient atmosphere, and then that's mixed with the oxygen inside the turbine. The patient and the device is protected from the air that's entrained in from the ambient. We can have an option of a HEPA filter, so you can protect patient and the device going forward. In terms of the device itself, you can tailor this and configure it to whatever your clinical need is, or down to granular clinician-specific preferences. On here, we have the generic pressure flow volume waveform that they would typically expect to see on a critical care ventilator. And over on the right, we have some monitored parameters. Again, all this can be tailored. So for instance, rather than having the waveforms, which take years to master, we could actually replace this. We can put what we call our animated lung. So it's a great visual cue for ICU clinicians that are busy. The demand on the resources is always increasing, and the supply of resources in terms of staffing doesn't always necessarily keep up. So here we have a great visual cue that illustrates to the busy clinician that, granted, they might well be very comfortable analyzing, assessing this. But for the more junior staff or the new hires or the agency staff that they might have, this will be a good, useful tool. It gives you a visual indicator as to what's going on with how elastic the lungs are, or potentially how tight the airways are. So here, green, all is well. What I'll do is I'll just tweak this lung here, and I've essentially made the airways tighter. So it averages over 8 breaths, and then you'll eventually see a change on the airways here. They'll start to redden, illustrating that maybe the patient needs to be reassessed. Whilst we're waiting for that to change, you can also see here that with this setting, with the P + 5, if we increase that, maybe with a sicker patient, for instance, you see that essentially the more bubbles remain in the lung. And that, again, that's a visual indicator that you might be using moderate to maybe higher levels of PEEP. So it's averaged over here, like I say, it's assessing breath by breath, but averages over 8. So you can see that there's potential here that maybe the patient needs suctioning, maybe they need reassessing for their bronchodilators. So various reasons, but at least it gives a very quick reference to the busy clinician that maybe something just needs to be reassessed. So we'll just pop that back to normal. I'll just drop this measurement back down. Over on the top right-hand side there, again, we have another visual indicator there that provides objective metrics for the clinicians to assess their patient. My background is nursing, and typically you would get a phone call at maybe 6 in the morning and say, how's the patient in bed? 5. If all is well, maybe turn the sedation off, and then the clinician will come in later and reassess them. So the assessment of the patient can be done using objective metrics, subjective metrics, but what we're doing here is we're taking these parameters on here and we're tailoring it to either the department or the doctor's requirements. So the patient would have to satisfy these requirements and be within certain degrees of brackets. And then the little bars, you see there are green bars, there are yellow bars. There are two pieces of data feeding into each bar. If both parameters are satisfied, then the bar will be green. If one of the parameters is heading off the ranch, it will give you a yellow bar. If both parameters were off, then it would be red. Okay, so it's like a traffic light system. Okay, and we're aiming for all green. Now, so in the scenario whereby they've turned the sedation off the patient and the patient starts to wake up and they start to take spontaneous breaths, you see there the purple diaphragm. There we go. So a timer will start so that when the doctor comes onto the department, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour and a half later, or after they finish their case, for instance, they can come on and this timer will start counting up. And then they have, again, they have something concrete to work with that, okay, this patient has met my objective metrics for X number of minutes. Now, sometimes the nurses break the circuit and they might need to suction the patient. Yeah? Gives you a 3-minute grace period there so that it doesn't go back to zero, so the patient's not going to be sat there wide awake and having to potentially stay on the device longer than necessary. The device itself, we can connect our heated circuits, our air life circuits. We also have the option here, so if we just pause everything for a moment, when you switch the device on, you can choose whether you're working with a neonatal, a pediatric, or an adult patient, whether you're doing invasive ventilation, so that might be with having a breathing tube in the patient. When you then come to de-escalate the treatment, you might want to take the breathing tube out and put them on a mask. And we do the AirLife NIV masks, don't we? So the nurse, for instance, is not running around the department looking for a different device, a different circuit. You would just simply disconnect here and plug the mask on. Similarly, if the patient wants to maybe have something to drink, something to eat, they might want to, again, de-escalate and switch to high flow oxygen therapy. So all you would do is simply take the inspiratory limb, plug that in there, get a nice green screen, it's indicative that you're in high flow oxygen therapy. Just pop the flow down and start. So nobody's having to run around the department looking for a different piece of equipment, different circuits, different flow sensors, etc. It's all in one device. Cost is certainly at the forefront of our customers' minds now. So they want to do more with less. Every capital device that they have in the department needs to be serviced every year. Their staff have to be trained on it every year. So you have one device that can do invasive, non-invasive, or high flow oxygen therapy. One device, one circuit. So there's a potential for cost savings there. We can tailor everything to the patient's ideal body weight. Not their actual body weight, but their ideal body weight. Because, for instance, if you were to go to the US and you were to eat McDonald's breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 6 months and you came back a little more portly than when you went there, your lungs have not changed. So the clinical guidelines tie everything back to your ideal body weight. And this is what we would do here. So we'd have maybe a female of X number of centimeters, and it calculates what the predicted body weight is. Okay, so it's tailored to the individual. Going back to the earlier comments before about clinicians having less resources, less time, being able to provide them a workflow solution. I'm going to change the mode here. So AVM, adaptive ventilation mode. It's a mode that the doctors can use from the moment the patient comes into the ICU doors to the moment the patient's potentially ready for the breathing tube to come out. Okay? So here, this is our staging area. You set everything up how you want it, only when you're comfortable. would you then hit apply. So on the screen here, we have a white line. So we know we put a female patient in of X centimeters. So we knew what the ideal body weight was. Therefore, from that, we can calculate how much volume of breaths does that patient need each minute. That line going along there is that volume of breath. And you can achieve that in many different ways, either with a higher respiratory rate and a smaller tidal volume, or a lower respiratory rate and a higher tidal volume. What AVM is doing, you see this little white dot here? There? So it's it's almost like a biofeedback system. It's taking the lung mechanic data back into the system and processing that, and always aiming for the lowest work of breathing for the patient. So it's seeing how tight the lungs are, how tight the airways are, taking that into account to make it as easy as possible and as comfortable as possible for the patient. So the blue is the patient at that moment. That's dynamic, that's going to change, maybe by whether they're coughing or changing position, etc. Around here you see the square. That's a protective frame. So we're protecting the patient from too little volume, too larger volumes, too faster rate, too slower rate. So as long as the patient is within that square, they're being protected. Here, it's showing what their rate is at the moment, so it's showing 14, and a tidal volume of 320. So that means every breath of 14 breaths per minute, they're going to be about 320 mils. But if something changes with the patient, so for instance, if I change the airway resistance, so if you have an asthmatic type patient and everything's tight, those patients need more time to breathe out. So you'll see on here, the shape will change. It will slow the rate down, and it will increase the volume, because having a slower rate is going to give a longer time for the patient to breathe out. So you end up with a more narrow and more vertical looking protective frame. So you see here the rate's dropping, the volume's increasing. And that's what we would expect, that's what the doctors would want. Similarly, if the patient's lungs became stiff, then when you think that the lungs, you don't want to squeeze potentially the large volumes in, so you might want to take a different approach, i.e. smaller volumes, but more of them. Okay? So you can protect the lung, because you don't want to damage the lung. So what you'll see here is that the rate will start to increase and the volume will drop. So that's what we want to see. So this protective frame is going to change its shape, essentially. So when the doctor walks on, they don't even have to concern themselves with the numbers. They would have that visual cue there straight away, illustrating to them what's going on with their patient. So this will end up more of a horizontal, flatter type rectangle. It pairs nicely with the animated lung. So if we add that lung that we had before, so the two go together nicely. So again, you have that elongated rectangle. The lung fields here are showing that there's redness, that it's detecting that the lungs are not as elastic as they were, and it's taking that into account. So we see now, instead of having a rate of 12, the rate's up to 17 or 18, and the volume is dropping. So again, it's aiming to protect the patient. In terms of the infant patients that you may well put onto here, we can use our infant flow LP consumables. We can use our infant circuits, our infant air life circuits, so you can put those on there as well. So there's a lot of crossover and tie-in there that we can do, as in bringing our whole One Vyaire offering together. Because between the four feet from the vent to the patient, we can drop in our Verso closed suction system. We can put in our bypass HMEs, or we can use our circuits. So there's a lot of opportunity there for us in order to share the quality products that we have. In terms of the busy ICU that we referred to before, some doctors, you might have several doctors on the department, and they might have different schools of thought. So for instance, Dr. Joan might like this mode and these settings. So when the patient is admitted under the care of Dr. Joan or Dr. Dodds, you can go here and you can save it as a profile. You can save up to 20 profiles. So you can standardize your approach to care. So we'll go into here, we'll just slide along, and we'll save this as Dr. Joe. Okay. So now when the patient is being admitted under your care, for instance, there's no doubts in terms of what they're going to do. So again, you have up to 20 profiles to choose from. So, okay, well, Dr. Joan likes the device set up that way, likes to ventilate in that way. That's the recipe that she likes. And then everything is set up and ready to go in the way that you like it for your patients. You can have that labeled disease-specific, you could have it doctor-specific, department-specific, whatever they want to call it. But then it just promotes standardization as to how the data is presented and how the ventilator behaves out of the gate. Any questions?
Does the bellavista accommodate for people that have hiccups or coughing?
So AVM, for instance, would be interrupted by the likes of, oh, sorry, okay, I see which track you're going down now. Okay, right, so for instance, breathing through a tube, it's very narrow, yeah, and it's uncomfortable. So we want to make it as easy as possible for the patient. So what we've done here, we have two features, auto rise, and we call this auto sync. So the doctor can set it manually if they want, but we have a feature here to make it more comfortable for the patient. If you think, to turn the breath off, you can have it set manually, where the patient has to reach a certain timing threshold or a certain flow threshold, and they will struggle to breathe out until that threshold is met. If we automate it with auto sync, it synchronizes with the patient. So for instance, it's almost like the analogy of if you were swimming and you were snorkeling, and I kept my hand over the snorkel, and you're trying to breathe out, you're going to struggle. And we don't want the patient struggling and uncomfortable. Whereas with auto sync, once it detects the hiccups or the coughing, for instance, it will open the valves and allow the patient to breathe out. Similarly, we have auto rise. So again, these are selling features that we go to market with. With auto rise, going from our low pressure to our high pressure, as soon as the gate's opened, the foot's on the turbo and it goes as fast as possible to get that breath into the patient, but without overshooting. You don't want that. So it's as fast as possible from the outset, and then it slows down as it reaches the top so that you don't overshoot your target. So yeah, we do. We can accommodate the patient, keep them more comfortable. And they're two features that we would want to get into tenders. Hello.
You said that you can have the HEPA filter as an option.
Yes.
Why would you not want that if you're using the ambient air?
Infection protocol, infection control policy from the hospital will dictate which direction they go. We have a standard filter, which just takes out regular particles out of the air, but you know, in light of the times that we live, it's a very handy feature to have. And you would just change the internal filter every 30 days.
What's the standard list price for a 1,000 or 1,008?
That would vary depending on whether we're in a direct or indirect market, by business partner, by country, because the import costs, the freight costs, the importation taxes differ wildly across the landscapes that we serve.
You said that the market is very competitive.
Yes, it is.
What is the unique selling points with this?
So all ventilators put a breath in and let the breath out. They all do that. So what we've done, we've made it very configurable and tailored to how the clinician wants to use the device. In addition to adding certain features such as the animated lung, the vent summary, the auto sync, the auto rise, all these features that we've put into the box to make it as efficient as possible. The being able to switch between invasive, non-invasive, as I was saying before when I opened, we can go toe-to-toe with the market leaders in non-invasive. You know, we found out, well, what is your flow capability? Well, we're going to match that. And then we've added our own synchrony tools as well, so that they don't have to have several devices that need maintenance and training and the like. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.